I am a female living in the Midwest. Before I get into this, I think a little backstory is needed. We've always lived, not really in the middle of nowhere, but in a rural little cluster of houses directly off a less traveled highway, roughly about 10 minutes from town, and surrounded by cornfields on 3 sides, and a set of very steep train tracks directly behind my house, with another cornfield directly behind that. Most days, being the bored kids we were in the early 2000s, we had nothing else to do other than play outside. No one's parents wanted 8 other kids plus their own running around in their house all day, so most days we climbed over the tracks and would play in the small clearing on the other side right next to where the cornfield would start. This mainly consisted of running around with no parental supervision and swearing anytime the situation allowed, pretending to be Pokemon trainers, and throwing rocks like asshole kids, pretending they were Pokeballs. This was somewhere around 2003 and early 2004, so I would have been about 7 or 8. I don't remember exactly what time of year it was, but there was snow on the ground and it was cold as hell. Like mom bundled you up in everything but the rug kind of cold. I had gone over the tracks with a couple other neighbor kids, which by the way was ridiculously hard, considering I was in 2 coats and a couple pairs of pants and could barely bend my limbs. And when I say these tracks were steep, I mean like you could jump off the top and almost hit the direct bottom. I remember arguing with my mom before I left, because how in the hell was I supposed to run and play like everyone else when I looked like a marshmallow child? Looking back, I'm happy she made me dress for the weather. Otherwise, what happened could have been a lot worse. We were there for about an hour, throwing snowballs, and a few rocks, at each other, when one of the kids, Dylan, decides it would be so fun if he took the sled I had decided to bring and slide down the steep incline of the railroad tracks. This, to me, was the stupidest idea. But I was already one of the least liked kids in our group, and the only reason they let me hang out was because my parents would always buy me the best video game consoles. And I was the first person on my block with a Game Boy Advance. So I decided against saying anything, because I didn't want to be made fun of for being a wimp. The sides of the tracks were covered in very pointy rocks that led into a small group of trees. Bad idea. But I went along with it. I told them I couldn't go down because I wouldn't be able to climb back up with what I was wearing, but I would push them. They agreed, and soon all the dumbass kids, excluding myself, were flying down the side of these tracks and narrowly missing the trees at the bottom. You know that feeling you get when you're a kid, and you're doing something your parents never actually told you not to do, but you still knew they'd be mad if they found out? Yeah. I had a knot in the pit of my stomach just waiting for my mom to appear and start screaming at all of us. After a while of doing this, with no one getting hurt, my nervousness started to go away, and soon I was enjoying pushing everyone else as hard as I could down the incline. I know, kids are weird. Finally, after the last kid came back up, we all decided to go home since it was getting cold, and it was starting to get dark. The kid I mentioned earlier, Dylan, being the little prick he was, decided that I couldn't have my sled back unless I went down the hill at least once. Since I didn't have to climb back up after I went down, I agreed. Although, I wasn't really comfortable with it. In fact, I was terrified. But the need to seem cool to other kids when you're young is ridiculous, and soon I was sitting on the sled waiting for my push. I held on to the sides of the sled until my knuckles turned white and was ready to go. Dylan comes up behind me, put one foot on the sled, and pushes me hard by my shoulders. Instead of shooting off down the incline like the other kids, my sled stayed in place. But I did not. No, I flew off the front and started rolling head over feet, getting jabbed and poked by the rocks coating the side of the tracks. I remember smacking the side of my forehead near my temple on a large rock wedged beneath a fallen tree branch, and that's the last thing I remember. I woke up in the hospital early the next morning with a bandage wrapped over one eye and circling to the back of my head, like you would see in a war movie. My left eye socket was broken, along with multiple lacerations on my face from being cut by rocks while falling. I also had the beginning stages of frostbite on my nose and ears. My mom was sitting in the recliner next to me, talking to my dad quietly on the phone about pressing charges. I was later informed that after Dylan had purposely pushed me down the side of the tracks, he told the other kids, several of whom were his brothers and sisters, that if they told anyone he would beat them up. So they all went home as it got dark, and left me knocked out at the bottom of the incline with a bleeding forehead and my bare face halfway submerged in the snow. When my dad came looking for me, he went to the other kids' houses, and eventually, after threatening to call the police when they kept telling him different stories, they admitted that Dylan had pushed me down the side of the tracks, and that's where I still was. My mom told me several years later that when my dad found me, he originally thought I was dead because my face was cold and blue and covered in blood. He ran home carrying me, threw me in the back seat of the car, and sped the whole way to the hospital, not stopping for a single red light. When he got to the hospital, they literally had to cut me out of my multiple layers of clothing, and the doctor told my mom that if I hadn't been so well bundled, I could have easily frozen to death. I made a full recovery with only a few minor scars on the upper left side of my face. Nothing happened to Dylan, because he was only around 8 or 9 at the time, and before spring came, his whole family moved out of the neighborhood. My parents did end up suing his parents, but we barely got enough to cover the hospital bills. So, that's the story how I almost died trusting some asshole kid. And if anyone was wondering, I was no longer allowed to have anything to do with any of the kids in the neighborhood again, aside from the ones who weren't there. I was also never allowed to go near the train tracks again. The person who submitted this next story did also submit a news article, but they asked me not to make that public, since it's a small town they live in. This story is a pretty deep story, and it does refer to sexual assault. If you want to comment on this story, make sure you keep it clean. I am a female and I live in a decent area. Not too bad, not too good. Safe, but not safe, if that makes sense. People could walk outside at night and early in the morning, and almost nothing would happen. Almost. Quick backstory. My mom and I never had much money. She couldn't really drive me to school because it was hard for her to wake up in the morning. So to make things easier for her, I would walk to school. I live about 1 through 1.5 hours away from my school, so I would wake up at about 5 to leave around 5:30 in the morning and get to school in time to dry off from the sweat and to do early studying just in case. Judge me all you want, but unless you've grown up with nothing, you wouldn't understand me and my family's struggle. So now to the main story. I was 16 years old. I walked to and from school a good 2 years since I started high school. The way I would walk to school was kind of complicated. This journey would take a good chunk out of my morning, but I loved the morning fresh air. I kind of lived near the ocean, so I could smell a nice breeze when I got to school, see the stars, and enjoy my time before having to socialize. Well, this morning, unfortunately, didn't go so smooth. So I started making my way to school, and passed my apartments and made my way to the alley. All of a sudden, a black car with tinted windows pulled up next to me, and some guy wearing pantyhose on his head pointed a gun in my direction. I was able to see through the pantyhose, and I saw how mean his eyes were. I don't remember the man anymore except his eyes. He pointed a gun in my direction and said, "You, give me all the money you have." I didn't know how to respond, so I just put my hands up, looked at him and said, "I just have $1 on me. If you want that, go ahead." He got out of the car and started to frisk me, still pointing the gun in my direction. He then opened the back seat of his car and told me to get in on my stomach. Because I didn't know what to do, I did as he asked. He then told me to interlock my fingers behind my back, so I did as he said. He then suddenly bound my hands together and then got something to cover my eyes. I'm not sure exactly what he used to cover my eyes, but I feel like he used the pantyhose on his face to tie my hands. Its stretched out fibers dug into my arms as I laid in the back seat. "If you do anything, I won't hesitate to kill you." He drove for a really long time. I'm not sure of how long, but he did stop frequently at what I believe were stoplights. At one stop, he braked so hard that I fell in between where your feet go in the seat. He just laughed it off and started talking to me while driving. "So what's your name?" I told him. "What's your age?" 16. "What grade?" 10th. Afterwards, he just went quiet, and an awkward air just went around us. I was really confused on why he kept asking questions, but I thought that maybe if I got on a human level with him, he would let me live. After a long time driving, I heard my phone go off. My friends would usually call me if they noticed that I'm not around at a certain time. They called a good 2 or 3 times before I didn't hear my phone go off anymore. "Your friends?" "Yeah, they always call me when they don't see me at school." "Why?" "Why?" I kinda laughed a bit at this. Because friends care about each other. It's human nature. Another moment of silence before he stops the car. I heard him get out of the car, and I heard a lot of typical background noises. Buses, cars, people doing typical chattering. I was hoping at this point that I was in a free zone. I heard the back door open, and I suddenly felt a cold line on the back of my leg. I heard the tearing and cutting of clothes as my butt felt the cold morning breeze. I felt like I had tunnel hearing. I just heard the scissors cutting and the clothes tearing. After he stopped tearing my clothes off, he propped me up in the back seat and started to sexually assault me. I don't know how long it was, but I did black out while it happened. I felt him hit my head and tell me to get the fuck up. I got out of the car, still naked mind you, and followed him. He said to get on my knees and don't look back or he will shoot. I heard the trunk open and he threw clothes at me. "Here, take these." He cut whatever he tied my hands with and started making his way back to his car. I heard the car door close and the engine start. The heat of the car backed off, and suddenly I felt cold air. I sat there for maybe a good 10 minutes before I took off the blindfold, the morning light hurting my eyes. Then it took another minute for me to comprehend that I was in an open apartment parking garage. I looked at my hands, and they were slightly cut with, you guessed it, the stocking the asshat was wearing. Next to me were clothes. I think it was a really big sweater and small pants. I put them on in a hurry and ran the hell out of the garage. I ran up to the first apartment and started knocking, but no one answered. I saw across the street that there was a mailman entering the apartment, so I ran across a busy street and tried to find the mailman. I couldn't see him, so I started knocking on a random door and cried for help. Fortunately, a man opened the door and looked at me in shock. I just told him a very hurried story of me being kidnapped and that I needed to use his phone. He told me to stay right there, and he grabbed his phone. The first thing I did was call my mom. I know it sounds stupid, but she's the only one I could think of in that moment. She heard me crying, and I told her what happened. She was mortified to hear that her daughter was abducted and raped. She talked to the guy for a second, and he said that he was going to call 911. He let me in, sat me on his couch, offered me some water, and walked around his apartment. I felt kind of bad for him, because you don't expect to wake up to a random girl at your door asking for help. I looked at the time and noticed that it was about 7:30 or 8-ish. This was 8 years ago. Sorry if I'm not that specific. A couple of minutes in, and funny thing, my mom got to this guy's house before the police. Seeing her, I broke down. I cried like a little bitch after the realization came in. She stayed with me and the guy until the police came in. The typical, what did he look like, what car did he drive, all that fun stuff. But all in all, the police were really nice. They needed to take me to the hospital to get some samples for DNA from that asshat. But before I left, I wholeheartedly thanked the guy and followed the officers to the hospital. The afterwards of the day doesn't really matter because police inquiries are really boring, but I was able to stay home for the day. My mom wanted to know if I wanted to take a week off, but instead I went to school because I really wanted to hang around with friends. When I went to school, everyone knew. It was a small school, so rumors go around fast. The teachers felt so bad for my mom, but they tried their best to console her. Afterwards, my mom started dropping me off at school. She didn't want me to walk to school ever again after what happened. The police never found out who did it. They caught his car on surveillance camera, but no other leads, unfortunately. When this happened, it felt bad at first, because I thought it was my fault. But now thinking back on it, I didn't do anything wrong. I've since become stronger from this. I know that may sound weird, but friends and family do help you in your time of need. If you would like a chance to have your story featured in an upcoming video, make sure you email it to urmaker6260@gmail.com. First things first, I want to say that I'm very happy that both of these people in both stories are okay, and I'm really upset that the rapist in the second story hasn't been caught yet. I don't know if there's necessarily a right answer to a situation like that. Me personally, this is just my personal opinion, I won't get in a car with someone if they're holding a gun. I'd rather make a scene where I'm at, because if they shoot me there, it's going to be harder on them. If you get in a car with them, now they can take you wherever the hell they want and do whatever. And a lot of the time, you don't end up coming out alive. But that's also where it comes down to what you feel works in your situation. I'm just happy that she was able to move on from this incident. On that note, everyone watch your back, and try to have a good day. And I'll catch you in the next video. And just remember, it's always scarier if it's true.